All right, welcome to Critical Wade Theory. So, in this episode, I'm going to look at a shutdown that happened recently, the 2026 TSA shutdown, which happened in March of this year. And I'm going to sort of do a radical critique of what happened and look at what the local donation drive reveals about it. I'm going to look at what happened in my area where I live. So, interestingly enough, as a result of the 2026 TSA shutdown, 10 frontline workers at Houghton County Memorial Airport, which is my local airport, anyway, they took mutual aid into their own hands by starting a localized donation drive. So, mutual aid is often considered a radical anarchist concept. I mean, it's not like they exclusively own the idea, but it is sort of it's a radical theory, that when authority fails, people will have to take things into their own hands, and that is sometimes called mutual aid. So rather than accepting cash, the organizers restricted contributions specifically to $10 to $20 gift cards for local businesses. And the initiative was made public through an airport Facebook post highlighting how federal shutdowns can inflict some significant hardship on security personnel at small regional hubs like in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, which is again where I live. So that's why it's kind of interesting to look at this story because I'm, digging into some local news here. Well, it's not news anymore. This happened in March, but it's still relevant. It's still a little slice of an example of what was happening in different parts of the country. So while this post framed the workers as dedicated public servants, steadfastly maintaining safe air travel despite missing guaranteed pay, a radical, or let's just say an anarchist analysis reveals a much darker dynamic beneath this liberal narrative. Let's just call it a liberal narrative because that's kind of what this is. Um, so, to what extent are those silly Billy anarchist types correct? Even when it comes to a little story like this, how true are those radical theories that we're just supposed to totally dismiss because it's pie in the sky nonsense? Well, it turns out that they actually make some valid They would actually make some valid arguments when it comes to this issue here. So, you get into the idea of state power and the illusion of essential work. Well, what exactly is essential work? The crisis that was facing these 10 workers, it was not an accidental administrative hiccup. It was a direct consequence of state design, oddly enough, because under U.S. federal labor law, frontline screeners are classified as quote unquote essential personnel. What does that mean? While this legal designation strips them of the right to strike or withhold their labor, forcing them to report to work under threat of disciplinary action or termination, even when the state fails to provide their paychecks. So the state can fail its obligations, but heaven forbid they fail theirs, and decide, well, we're gonna react the way that you would think a person might react in a capitalist society, which is withholding their labor if the state withholds its payments. So, anarchist theory has long criticized the state's monopoly on force, of course, and I'm not so much going to get into that uh, when it comes to this topic. But anyway, they emphasize how state institutions treat working class individuals as expendable units of coercion. So during federal budget standoffs like this one, political factions can use workers' basic livelihood as leverage in partisan negotiations. And what do you know? That's exactly what happened here. So this actually adequately lines up with what well-read anarchist would probably say as a cause for concern, as a critique of the government in this type of scenario. So the government extracts compulsory labor to maintain its security apparatus while simultaneously denying the basic means of survival to the people performing that very labor. So it's like it's feeding directly into the anarchist critique of power when it comes to, I don't know, you might want to call this incompetence, uh, showboating of some kind, uh, power wrangling, and it was just an embarrassing failure, sort of like what you would see in a failed state or something like that. Well, anyway, that's exactly what happened here when these people's livelihoods were basically put on the line. And you get into the debate of the security state versus true community security here. So again, from a silly billy anarchic perspective, the Transportation Security Administration, or the TSA, itself represents an expansion of the surveillance state rather than an institution of genuine safety. Now, that's not to say that, I mean, security guards never uh, actually provide any type of security. All you would need to do is provide one example of it, and you would be able to say, "Oh, look at that. That's an example of this being a necessary profession." All right, I get it. I get it. If you find just one example, but keep in mind that the TSA was established in the aftermath of September 11th, 2001, under the so called Department of Homeland Security, and the TSA functions to enforce, the sort of propaganda aims of territorial control and normalize things like border infrastructure and condition the public to accept certain invasive, well, also uncertain invasive body searches and continuous surveillance as the price of movement. So you really have to keep that in mind. It's it's a mixed bag at best. Like maybe somebody out there could point me to an example of them actually, preventing terrorism or something like that. Um, but keep in mind the hijackers on September 11th themselves are said to have used box cutters. So I don't know if like that should have been such a threat on those planes anyway. It it's quite a thing that happened on September 11th. Like according to the official narrative, at least, the entire world was changed because of a group of, you might say, well organized terrorists or whatever. But for all I know, you could just call them ragtag terrorist types. But they were armed with box cutters, and they forever changed the course of world history. And it's crazy that just some box cutters are ultimately the source of all this like paranoia and the need for security everywhere and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, it all depends on how you look at it. I know that people can be threats of various kinds with various means, but also government incompetence is another significant threat. Also, people who have toddler brains who are president can be a major national security threat by alienating all of our allies and launching wars and, just murdering civilians and stuff like that. Making the country a weaker place and a stupider place that is more dangerous. Deregulations can lead to public safety and public health crises like we're seeing. Like right now, you've got what is commonly called diarrhea lettuce concerns. Like, is the lettuce going to be safe? Uh, of course, there's the screwworm crisis when it comes to beef. Um, so people are now wondering, is Trump going to be slaughtering a bunch of horses and having that mixed in with regular beef? Are the consumers of beef now going to be eating horse meat? And how is deregulation going to actually harm the public? Well, it seems like it's not going to help that much. Um, and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's one thing to have a regulatory state, and you could criticize it for this or that. Maybe it's not doing a well enough job. Um, but it's another thing to, like, just slash it so that nobody's properly inspecting anything, and you know who knows what's going to be on the shelves in our stores as a result. I mean, this is what happens when you replace the government regulations with nothing. You know, it's not like there was some sweeping industrial standard that suddenly took shape, and people in the industries themselves magically democratized the process between, the workers and the consumers. No, that never happened. You know, it's just a free for all now. And, that kind of goes perfectly in line with this TSA story, really, if you think about it. So you also get into institutional coercion because the state requires these screeners to enforce security theater and border controls, yet it abandons them financially the moment the parliamentary squabbles, or whatever you want to call them, paralyze the budget. And, it's also a matter of capitalist dependence because workers at these small regional airports, like mine, they often are earning modest wages relative to the cost of living, and they're left with zero structural safety nets when the state defaults on its payroll obligations. And you also have to consider the mutual aid that I was talking about. So the response at Houghton County Memorial Airport, I think it demonstrates the difference between state-sanctioned uh, charity and genuine mutual aid. Because, when it comes to the airport's rule rejecting cash in favor of small local gift cards, I think it really reflects systemic distrust because it mirrors the paternalistic structure of state welfare programs, which restrict how marginalized or distressed individuals can spend resources. Like, one of the things they tried to do is micromanage what people can spend their food stamp money on. Like, you can't buy sody pop now, you can't buy candy bars, and of course it's like an attempt to finger wag at the poor. Like, you can't have good things anymore that you enjoy. Like, everybody knows that pop isn't the best thing for you, or soda, as a lot of people call it. Um, but do you really need somebody finger wagging at you, telling you, "Oh, you can't drink this, you have to drink that"? It's the same thing with what they're trying to do with healthcare, too. Like, they're trying to means test everything, and they're doing that at a time where more progressive candidates are running for office, and they're trying to create universal healthcare or Medicare for all. And it seems like the alternative to that is more of the status quo, where there's more means testing. Like, if you're going to get help with your medical care, you need to basically be completely and totally in the poorhouse. If you're at all well off, well, they don't think you need any sort of assistance with your spending or anything like that. And it's a sham. It's a sham. We could get rid of these insurance companies that are the middleman, and just have it so that you don't have to pay at the point of service for any sort of medical treatment. Well, I know it's not. I know you don't technically have to pay right away, but they do bill you for it, and a lot of medical debt has really taken. Uh, well, it's grabbed people by the nuts, so to speak. And people are drowning in medical debt, and you know this this kind of thing where they're like, oh, you have to do things this way or that way, like the means testing thing. Like you have to have a job lined up if you want uh, proper medical uh, assistance or whatever. Like that's stupid. You know, in fact, it kind of puts the cart before the horse because in order to have a decent job, well, you should have decent health care first to better assure that you are in the best health so you can more easily have a job. And you know, if you're not getting, you know, regular checkups with your doctor, well, it increases the odds that something is going to go wrong with your health. You know, you're going to miss something. And if things escalate, if you don't get something properly diagnosed, well, then you end up missing work and stuff like that. Or, of course, you could even just outright die from whatever you're not properly treating. So, uh, yeah, I'm just, you know, critiquing all of these different aspects of the system. So the story also looks at grassroots survival. So on the ground, workers are relying on neighbor to neighbor solidarity to meet basic needs, at least in this story. And it really shows the vulnerability of even state employment. You know, back in the day, my dad would tell me that some of the best jobs I could get would be government jobs because well, they were normally better paying, at least according to what he would say. And, you know, it was, you know, you had benefits and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, the Republicans want to make it so that, you know, all those kind of jobs are just dysfunctional because they want a system that just caters to the billionaires and maybe the 100 millionaires. You know, I don't want to leave those out. You know, so many people leave out the 100 millionaires, but I'm pretty sure even if you're not a billionaire, you know, some of these Republicans will have your attention, even if you're a 100 millionaire. So, when formal systems collapse, human survival inevitably relies on decentralized community level cooperation, which is mutual aid, and which again is linked to anarchic principles, you know, of self help and helping others directly rather than relying on, you know, relying strictly on a system of authority. So while public relations framing attempts to romanticize unpaid labor as selfless, heroic duty, a radical critique exposes the reality that state power relies on coerced labor, enforcing control over human mobility while shifting the burden of worker survival onto the local community. So that's about it for this episode. It's always fun to look at how a lot of different stories actually line up with radical critiques of power. It happens more often than not. So let me know what your thoughts are, and have a good day. Oh, like and subscribe too. Yeah, you know the standard trope. Hit like and subscribe. I've got to do that in every video, otherwise people might forget to do it, and we can't have that. Anyway, goodbye.